G'day and welcome to J&B Talk F1. This week, considering last week we had a bit of a break due to unforeseen circumstances, apologies for that. This week will be our long-awaited silly season special where we discuss all the ins and outs for 2016, speculations, rumours, what have you. We're just opening the book up for you guys, and as always, I'm Jawad Yaqub, and joining me, Baden Westerweller. How are you, Baden, after that little break we had?
Why, hello, Jawad. It's been a long time.
1 week
Yes,
does
very
certainly seem
well, thank
like a
you.
long time.
I'm very well. It's great to be back here. Indeed, the extenuating circumstances, it's fair to say it extends to both of us here, but now things look a lot clearer, and it's in good time, I guess, as we exit this summer break, which is now 1 week away from resuming at Belgium. But today, yeah, obviously we've got a bit of a tabloid discussion.
Exactly, and so what we're going to do basically is run through team by team what the contract situations are with their drivers, and then also go over some of the speculations that have been put forward by the press worldwide regarding who will end up where, and perhaps even go over some of our own insights as to who should deserve this drive and who deserves that drive. So without further ado, we'll start off at the top with Mercedes AMG, and yeah, the reigning world champions, they've locked their drivers in for 2016, so not much to discuss there, I guess.
Yeah, moving on from that one quite quickly, we saw Lewis had a bit of dithering earlier in the season around that Monaco time. There was that bit of speculation that could have caused him to consider his options, but in fact he had renewed prior to that event, and that's now set in stone that he'll be there for probably another 3 seasons, whilst, of course, Nico renewed sometime last year. We believe it's a long-term deal for another 2, possibly 3 seasons himself.
Indeed, and probably once you've got considering you have the best car on the grid, who wouldn't want to stay with? But I guess one point we'll probably be discussing perhaps next year, I'm just sort of signposting it here and now, is team harmony. Depending on who wins the championship this year out of the two, could there be a bit of disharmony between Rosberg and Hamilton, similar to Prost and Senna back in '89? Could we see a bit of that next year when one starts to get frustrated with the other? But just putting it out there in the sphere now, but that's something we'll look at definitely next year. So moving it on now to Ferrari, and Ferrari is where a lot of the speculation begins. Sebastian Vettel, first and foremost, is locked in for 2016, and it has to be commended that he's doing a great job to lead the team out of the post-Alonso era and into this almost this rejuvenated Ferrari. But the conjecture lies around Kimi Raikkonen's future, with Italian press members saying that his option for 2016 expired on the 31st of July, which means the only options Raikkonen has is either he gets a new contract altogether from the team, or they decide to go for someone else. And yeah, where we're going to start, Baden, regarding Kimi's place.
Oh, I think really it's inherent or incumbent upon Ferrari to just renew him for that continuous just pleasure for the team. The harmony, as you stated earlier as well, with Mercedes. Clearly, Kimi's had his fair share of bad luck, as highlighted by Hungary, where he was on track finally for a great result there, and obviously things didn't work out for him while Seb went on and took a great victory there. And obviously he's had his moments, Kimi, in qualifying most notably, but also on race days, as we saw in Austria. Nevertheless, it's a great improvement he has made on last season, and on the whole, he does deserve one more shot, I'd say, whether it comes true or not. But ultimately, I think he's still got that desire there. If he was clearly on the way out, he'd be making the noises now that this will be it for him.
And indeed, we've got in a couple of weeks' time also the Italian Grand Prix. Monza, the home of Ferrari, could potentially an announcement on the future of Ferrari's second driver come there. But yeah, as you said, Kimi perhaps deserves another year, considering the hardships he's had this season, many of which were not his of his own volition. But certainly there has been some errors regarding his performance, especially during qualifying. Now we've seen Vettel qualifying close to the front of the grid, and as a result has snared 2 victories. And Kimi uh, tends to tends to qualify lower down, as low as fifth or sixth. But yeah, let's talk about the contenders now for the second seat at Ferrari. And number one, Valtteri Bottas from Williams, who reportedly Ferrari has given Williams £12 million to buy out the remainder of his contract, which extends into next year.
Well, this is a bit of an interesting one. We did hear around the time of, I think it was between Britain and Hungary, that Bottas had signed with Ferrari, and that seemed to be rampant in the media for a few days, but that has quietened off considerably in the past few weeks. Whether this means that it hasn't come off, or whether it's just something that's going to be stagnant until a potential announcement, as you alluded to, at the Italian Grand Prix in about 3 weeks' time. But Bottas, it does seem as though that hype has cooled on him in the past month or so.
All right, then what about Nico Hulkenberg, the man who always seems to miss out on getting a top drive in his 5 or so years in Formula One? Started off with Williams, took a year off in 2011 to be test driver for Force India, and then he had that ill-fated tenure at Sauber for 2013 before ultimately returning to Force India. So he's been stuck in the midfield, if you like, and many say that his talents are being underutilized by the top teams.
As far as I'm concerned, anyway, next season is do or die for Nico. If he wants to really progress his career, he needs to at least find some semblance of a step up, whether that was quite unlikely, even so, in McLaren, if they could get their own act together, or even Williams, even though it's not quite the heights of a Ferrari, it's some step in that right direction. There's no point in him lingering for what would be a third consecutive campaign and his fourth overall at Force India. He really needs to make something happen in time for next season. Otherwise, indeed, even though it would be sad to lose him, he would be better off assessing his options in sports cars or IndyCar or any of those other international categories where his services are going to be commensurate to what he's achieved, not least with his Le Mans victory earlier this year.
And how do you think also the dynamic of having 2 German drivers working for Ferrari, how do you think that dynamic would play out?
That's something that really does count against Hulkenberg, because Vettel's now enmeshed within the team. As much as it'd be a nice concept, Vettel and Hulkenberg, they're 2 relatively youthful campaigners. It would be the idea of Ferrari, such an Italian team, they're having 2 Germanic drivers, essentially, that would just go against their general philosophy. They like to have a bit of flair amongst them, you would say, and that's what Kimi does have in his own Iceman way, persona. And to that end, the next man we discuss in Daniel Ricciardo, he may not be Italian purely, but the heritage is there, and he would be a much more logical fit to this end.
Yeah, he would be. Probably hands down, Daniel Ricciardo would be the ideal driver above Hulkenberg and Bottas to slot into that. But unfortunately, his contract with Red Bull at the moment is pretty binding. And as we've written down here as well, we said that it would be probably the most priciest thing, the priciest contract to buy off Red Bull for Ferrari. And would Ricciardo be worth that much money? And we said before that Williams reportedly had the £12 million deal for Bottas. We understand that Ricciardo's deal with Red Bull would be potentially 2 or 3 times that. So would Ferrari be willing to pay the price?
I think no doubt if Ferrari had the want there to acquire Ricciardo's services, they'd go for him, but I can't help but lean towards the notion that Kimi will be renewed for 1 more season, and there's every chance, though, that Ricciardo could end up in red again alongside Sebastian Vettel for the 2017 campaign, at which point we'll know more about Red Bull's future and, of course, his asking price if he were released from a a long-term contract. If he is tied there till 2018, it will be significantly lowered.
Indeed, and perhaps there might be some sort of team clause, team performance clause that might perhaps similar to what happened with Sebastian Vettel last year, where he had a clause in his contract with Red Bull that if his position in the championship was not at a certain level, then he could be released. But anyway, Ferrari, yeah, the Kimi seat, as you said, perhaps one more season for the Iceman before looking at younger prospects. But it was interesting watching the F1 show from Sky Sports the other day, and the journalist special, they were discussing how Ferrari would never take on a rookie, as it were, and it got me thinking, perhaps would they take on a rookie for next season? But they pretty much shot that down, saying, yeah, Ferrari are not the kind of team who want a rookie. They probably want someone who's had at least 1 year's experience in F1, whether it was Felipe Massa doing that single season at Sauber before jumping up.
I don't know, someone like Max Verstappen, he was indeed linked for a while there to Ferrari. That was much more spectacular, and it's thinking, though, I can't see any reason why anyone else other than this triumvirate of Bottas, Hulkenberg and Ricciardo would be in consideration for the seat. Perhaps Max in 12 months' time, depending on the Red Bull situation, could end up in the frame, but I'd say that 2-year window is the minimum that would contemplate any berth for a driver alongside Vettel.
Indeed, and more on Verstappen later on, and as we said, perhaps we'll wait until the Italian Grand Prix for some kind of announcement or hint as to what Ferrari's plans are for next year. But going back to Felipe Massa now, and we'll move on to the Williams team. Now, it hasn't been made official yet, but Felipe Massa does believe that he will be at Williams for 2016, so I guess we can semi-lock it in right now, but considering his performances that have been very much on par with that of Bottas this season, there's no reason as to why Massa shouldn't be in the team for at least one more year.
Oh, he'd be extremely hard done by to find himself wanting for a drive in 2016. Really, he's been reinvigorated since his switch from Ferrari. Last year he showed glimpses. This year he's turned it into more of a consistent outlay, and to that end there's been many weekends where he has outshone Bottas. We saw what he could do at Silverstone earlier on, even though it ultimately fizzled away. He's got that real fire there in the belly, which he had been lacking in pretty much his post Hungary 2009 days, and it would be a shame to see him curtailed so suddenly when he's got at least one, perhaps even two good campaigns in him still.
Indeed, and that's it for Massa. But then going back to Valtteri Bottas now the team still actually has an option on Bottas which it can take up for 2016. But this is where the whole conjecture comes in as to perhaps Ferrari want to buy out that option for the £12 million, as we said. And if they end up doing that, perhaps Williams with that extra cash in the back pocket could target a high-profile driver. So say if Bottas was to leave Williams at the end of this year and Williams do pocket a bit of cash, could they target a high-profile driver, say along the lines of Jenson Button, who, as we've learnt now, the second year on his McLaren deal that he signed last year is supposedly an option?
Yeah, well, that ties into this conjecture. In recent weeks, Button was linked quite naturally to a return to Grove. It was actually an idea I'd been considering for going back almost a year. I was thinking it would be nice to see him back where he started all those years ago before he was put out to pasture at Benetton and Renault, as it were, at the time. But obviously his McLaren days are coming to an end, and we have heard the speculation as well that he could be ousted for Stoffel Vandoorne, possible announcement at Belgium. And it does link, though, to this theory that McLaren wouldn't want to have Button at Williams, considering that this team is indeed a lot more competitive than his current employers at this time. But for the romance perspective, it'd be great to see Button in his marketability sense, and clearly he's still got that desire there as long as he's got a car which is half competitive.
Indeed, and more on Button when we get down to McLaren a little bit later. But yeah, Nico Hulkenberg perhaps a return to Williams for him as well. Even though um, with Williams, winning a championship might not be possible at the moment, but perhaps this would increase Hulkenberg's chance of perhaps fighting for podiums instead of being locked up in the midfield.
Yeah, well, that comes back to our little discussion there, where the Hulkenberg wants to progress his career in, I guess, halves, in full measures, or just go to a different category where he's almost guaranteed of being a front runner from the get-go. His allure there to Porsche, obviously, if there was a full-time carrot drive dangled in front of him, who could blame him for taking that if nothing else is lined up in F1? But of course, he has that history too at Williams, and if the outfit can continue their solid progress since Mercedes Power came on board for the 2014 campaign, then it would be a very lucrative seat for him to take up.
Indeed, and Hulkenberg had that maiden pole position with Williams at the Brazilian Grand Prix in 2010. So bit of success in that partnership in the past. But as I said, perhaps championships might not be a guarantee at Williams, but fighting for podiums and even the odd race win perhaps might be alluring for Hulkenberg to head back to Grove. But moving it on now, Alex Lynn, who's currently the team's test and reserve driver. He won the GP3 championship last year, and he's in GP2 at the moment. And would he be the ideal person to step up after Bottas moves out?
Well, he has had a few seasons, I guess, on the precipice there, and he made that switch to Williams this season after, I believe, he had his ties to Red Bull, and then he, of his own volition, opted out of that scheme once Max Verstappen and Carlos Sainz got the gig at Toro Rosso. But now he's chipping away nicely, and it would be quite logical as a Briton as well. He would tie in quite nicely in that Williams culture.
It would, and it would also allow another talented young driver to finally make it into F1, and perhaps in a seat that could be could be worth challenging podiums and whatnot. But yeah, there's Alex Lynn there. And how about then Roman Grosjean, who, to be fair, his talents also remain underutilized at Lotus, considering the shaky couple of seasons they've had going after Kimi Räikkönen's departure in 2013.
We'd be itching for some kind of move, whether it's through a Lotus purely with this buyout speculation, whether Renault buys back in as a factory operation and revisits former glories. If that can be guaranteed, then you'd want to stick around, obviously, at Enstone. But if not, it's natural that after 4 or 5 campaigns there under the Renault and now Lotus monikers, that he would be pretty keen to move on, because really from 2013, when he really put his best foot forward, he's just been a frustrated man. You can see as well the Friday sessions where he's restricted to an observer in that opening practice to allow Jolyon Palmer to have running time, and Maldonado plainly refuses to give his seat up under any circumstances. It really does hurt his running, and he'd be looking pretty much for any option which just gets him back to having seat time for the entire duration of a weekend, and with that chance of being in that podium fighting position.
As he got used to in 2012 and 2013, as Lotus Renault used to be. But yeah, there's some of the Hulkenberg, Lynn, Grosjean, Button there, some potential names for Williams if Bottas does decide to move on. And so moving it on to Red Bull Racing now, and considering the season that they have had, it would be fair, wouldn't it, to keep Daniel Ricciardo and Danny Kvyat?
Oh, turf them both out. Ricciardo, what's he done last 2 years? He's only, trounced the quadruple champion, and then this year he's still consistently a points runner, and we saw how close he came to pulling off what would have been a spectacular victory 2 years running last race at Hungary. And Kvyat, nah, he's only 20, he's just rubbish. Oh, get rid of both of them. Get Max and Carlos in. Clearly they're ready after half a season. Nah, world's gone mad. These guys must be retained. it would be a disgrace to see either of them given their marching orders. As much as a helmet Marco can be ruthless, they've done everything they can with the limited capacity offered by this RB11 in conjunction with the Renault Power unit, which has really been the least competitive of all, alongside with Honda this season.
Exactly, and but say there's the off chance that Ricardo does end up going somewhere else, not being turf, but if he gets out of his contract, do you think that one of the Toro Rosso kids may step up, or is it too soon to see them in a big team like Red Bull Racing?
Well, you only have to look at Danny Kvyat there. He only had one campaign. Obviously, he was expedited in his switch to the senior outfit. When Sebastian Vettel abruptly announced his departure to Ferrari, the plan had been always for the Russian to do a second campaign at the Fasten outfit. That obviously ended pretty quickly when he got the call up there. And of course, we were thinking at the time Alonso was eyeing off a gig at Red Bull, but that was shut down almost instantly. And Kvyat, to his credit, he's really picked up his act since that little kick up the backside from Herm Marco post-Spain. And if he can do it, then potentially what would Red Bull consider elsewhere? They wouldn't want to bring in an outsider, as it were, after breeding Sainz and Max Verstappen there. Clearly they'd be having confidence that they can pull up to the job. Whether it can happen, but you'd seem to think that they would go for someone in-house.
So ideally Red Bull would want to retain Ricciardo and Kvyat for 2016 and then keep Sainz and Verstappen at Toro Rosso for another year, and depending on what the situation is regarding the team's futures, see one of those two progress up, say if Ricciardo moves on or Kvyat moves on.
Yeah, I think ideally 2016 would be the time when it would tie in quite nicely if logically Ricciardo were to move on, say, to Ferrari. That would be quite ideal for Max or for Carlos, indeed, who is often overlooked because of considering Max's not even of age status, but both of them clearly, if they keep doing what they are right now, they'll be in the frame very realistically come 12 months' time. It just remains to be seen what would happen if Ricciardo did make a move to Ferrari for 2016, because then we could see one of those two given the nod much sooner than expected.
Indeed, and now over to Force India. So Sergio Perez looks likely to remain at the team for 2016. He's scored the team's second podium in the history of the team's existence last year at the Bahrain Grand Prix, and he's doing the best he can with the limited machinery that they have at Force India, and also brings quite a lot of sponsorship and backing from Mexico too. So it would be ideal for the team to hold on to Perez, and he's got such a good dynamic within the team after that disastrous season at McLaren in 2013.
Yes, obviously he also had those Ferrari ties going way back after his the highs of Malaysia 2012, and ultimately he did end up at the Woking outfit, and we all know how that fizzled out. He didn't seem to get along that gloriously with Ron Dennis, and he was subsequently shown his marching orders. But as you say, he's thrived in the less intense environment of Force India. It's just a matter of whether he's content being in this role with the perennial midfield outfit which Force India represents.
Or perhaps Force India could make some gains next year with that Mercedes engine and be more likely to challenge for the podium. But Perez more than likely locked in for next year, but the question mark remains over Nico Hulkenberg, as we've discussed already in regards to other teams. And does Hulkenberg really want another season at Force India?
As I alluded to earlier on, I just can't see how he'd be content to stick around for yet another campaign there when he's about 28, I believe. It's really at that crucial juncture now where he needs to just make a snap call. It's moving on or moving on in the other way, which is out of F1, unless he wants to take on some kind of testing role with a big outfit with the premise of a guaranteed berth in 12 months' time, which he's already done with Force India, and he's still there 4 years on. So really, I struggle to see how he will do another campaign at Force India. He's a man who really he's at that point where he just needs to make a move.
Indeed, and moving it on to then Lotus then. Before discussing the drivers, why not discuss the future of the team under this moniker? You know, it is questionable considering the rumours of a potential buyout by Renault.
Yes, well, you can see that if they clearly had that factory support in place, I'd be again a forerunner of the sport alongside with Mercedes, with that real renewed investment and passion, which has been wanting in recent seasons since their dynasty with Red Bull came to a halt with the Mercedes upswing. But it's clearly going to be a very lucrative seat if that does come off the Renault negotiations. We have heard reports that they're still contemplating a withdrawal from the sport, but you'd have to lean towards, based on what we have heard, that it's logical that they will make that progression back into being the factory team, and with that, there's going to clearly be a lot more capital there to push the development of the car forward, and that's something really which would be music to the ears of Romain Grosjean and Mr. Bolivar himself in Pastor Maldonado.
Yeah, well, we'll touch on Maldonado in a second, but if this takeover does end up coming to fruition next year, would it be enough to entice Grosjean to stay with the team, considering his personal sponsorships with a French oil company Total, which are also heavily linked together with Renault? Would he be the right driver? I mean, I'm sure he'll be the right driver to lead this team, but do you think he'll want to be there if they're not as competitive?
I think it's contingent on the backing being provided there and his knowledge that he can see they've got a vision, even if it's not something that instantly, but perhaps for 2017 or 2018, whenever the new regulations come into effect, that he can see that they're fully backed behind him as a French national there, obviously Franco-Swiss, whatever he is, that he's got the full backing to go the whole way and launch a real concerted effort there to have glory and make all of his perseverance in the past 3 or 4 years worthwhile. But as I said earlier, if that doesn't come off, then you can very much see how he'd wanted to move on one way or another.
And coming back now to Pastor Maldonado, is the time up for him now and his Bolivars?
Everyone would like to think so, but I doubt that's going to happen until the state Venezuela dries up their supply to him. As long as he's got that carrot dangled in front of a Lotus, then he's guaranteed a ride. But who knows, if Renault does buy back in, they mightn't rely on his investment.
Indeed, and if that were the case, then it would be logical for Jolyon Palmer to step up to Formula One. He won the GP2 championship last year. He's currently the test and reserve driver, as we alluded to earlier, and he does bring some strong financial backing through his father, the ex-F1 driver Jonathan. So perhaps losing Maldonado might not hurt Lotus or the Enstone team as much if they were to bring in Jolyon.
Oh, as he is also a Briton himself, that would be a nice combination, a Frenchman and a Briton there, obviously, because Renault's still a heavily British-orientated outfit there. And also you'd have to admit that Romain Grosjean would be quite the cheesed-off individual if all of his sacrificial handover of the pre-practice one duties to Palmer wasn't rewarded with a drive for next season. So it would be quite logical, if it's not Maldonado, that it will be Jolyon Palmer, unless maybe Nico Hülkenberg somehow comes into the equation.
Well, if the whole operation does transform over to Renault and they are competitive straight off the bat, then perhaps Hülkenberg might be interested in that. But there is no guarantee as to the future of this team. And indeed, we saw what happened in 2013 with Kimi Räikkönen when he wasn't paid. He was, he just wanted to leave altogether, not being paid for 3/4 of a season.
Yeah, absolutely. It wasn't worth it to him, so he was on his way.
Indeed. So Sauber, there's not much to discuss because unlike any of the other teams, they have been the first to announce that they're retaining both Felipe Nasr and Marcus Ericsson for 2016, which is good considering the the instability that the Swiss team has experienced over the last couple of years. So keeping the same driver lineup for the next season as they continue their development, perhaps with a Renault engine, as you alluded to last week. Oh no, the week before, sorry, or sticking with Ferrari. It's good to see that they're looking for consistency.
Oh, absolutely. Really, they're a team really that's always on that precipice. They've clearly had a few wanting campaigns of late. It's still a step in the right direction this year, despite the lack of that development, with Felipe Nasr alluding to the car not really undergoing a whole lot of steps forward in evolution since the Australian Grand Prix, the lofty heights which they did attain there with his fifth place, and Ericsson, I believe, in P8. Indeed, the Swede did pick up a solitary point at Hungary, but next year, if they can avoid the debacle with Guido van der Garde there, and they've possibly got a good supply deal with whether it's retaining Ferrari support or shifting to Renault, then they've got brighter days ahead.
Indeed, and Toro Rosso, we've sort of touched on it before when we were discussing Red Bull, but the best decision would be to hold on to Verstappen and Sainz for another season, just for the sake of consistency and also developing these young drivers. We saw before Daniel Ricciardo got his call up to Red Bull, he had spent two campaigns with the Italian squad, and that really developed him. And in terms of Sainz and Verstappen, it would be best to keep a hold of them. But then again, if one of them were to surprisingly get the call up, one would say that Pierre Gasly would be the ideal man to come into the fold.
Yeah, it's really, you're working on the premise, I guess, everyone is that they're going to get another season, and it'll be status quo at Red Bull as be addressed, and at that time, Gasly, he'll be surely ready to make that transition in 12 months, but if it does come to pass that it's for next year, he'll be probably that man in the picture.
Indeed, and over to McLaren now, where, one would have thought that before they'd want to sort out their car problems before talking about drivers for next year, next season. But Fernando Alonso, he signed a 3-year deal last year, but there is a question mark over him about whether he will stay or not, considering how disillusioned he has been this season so far, despite the season best result of 5th in Hungary.
Yeah, well, you can see clearly he doesn't have a lack of desire when he was pushing the stricken car back to the pits there. If he was a man who was just over it all, he would have walked away and given that infamous Lewis Hamilton final stare and walk off into the sunset, and he was rewarded for his toils with that quite chanceful 5th place on the Sunday at Hungary, and he's clearly got to be a man there who's frustrated. He's seen what Ferrari's done since his departure. Vettel's the one bathing in the glories with now multiple victories, but to see Alonso after yet another solitary campaign at Woking chuck the towel in, it would be you just look at him and just wonder like where his head is. Essentially, he's got to have some kind of a faith in the team that they'll get it right next season, even if it's not a championship, that they'll be back on the beaten path for 2016.
Would it, tarnish his legacy, perhaps, if he were to call it quits after this season? As much as, he stressed at the start of the year and when he signed for McLaren at the end of last year that he's aware that this is going to be a new project, and he's 100% committed to the team to build them to where they need to be. Do you think it will tarnish his legacy at all?
Well, stranger things have happened in Formula One. This is a unique beast, of course, the category. We wake up one day to a completely different story than the one we had gone to bed with the previous evening. But you'd have to look back and think Alonso at this point, if he did throw the towel in, it wouldn't be entirely unsurprising. Nevertheless, you'd expect him to at least stick around for one more campaign just to really see like what happened the last few times he's made a move to a different team, and the second that he's gone on his way, there's been a rejuvenation in fortune. So he'd probably be willing to give it a second year there.
and the leadership aspect too from someone like Fernando Alonso and Jenson Button too is quite important for this team as they rebuild. And Alonso, yeah, with the 3-year deal, you'd expect him to stay, but another question mark over Jenson Button. It's not whether or not he wants to stay; it's whether the team want him to stay, and they have that option on his contract, which they haven't yet taken up yet. But wouldn't it be ideal, as we were discussing with Toro Rosso and Sauber, to keep the same lineup and continue to develop?
Oh, absolutely. I think as well with the there's always that potential for this other outfit to come onto the grid, as we'll discuss shortly, that that would be the place to harvest the abilities of a Stoffel Van Dorn and give Magnussen his second crack at the sport just as well, whilst the Honda engines being power units still being developed in its infancy. These two elder seasoned veterans are the right men to lead them forward, so it would be a shock to see it would be Button who would be the one who would be sent on his marching orders. Alonso would leave of his own volition. So for these two, it makes sense to commit to them. But as we did hear as well a week or so ago, there is speculation that Van Dorn might be given the nod. So this is something we can't rule out entirely until an announcement is made about their 2016 lineup.
Indeed, and just talking about Kevin Magnussen and Stoffel Van Dorn, it's a bit unfortunate if it were for those guys, considering how many the level of stock that McLaren has on the young drivers, and unfortunately none of them will be able to be utilised, considering they've got two drivers of the calibre of Alonso and Button at the moment. But at the same time, Alonso and Button are the ideal pair to continue for at least another season, just whilst this McLaren Honda package gets up into the winner's circle. Moving it on to Mana Marussia now, and they're looking to continue a consistent approach into 2016, but got to say the only three drivers that would come into contention for seats there would be the incumbents Will Stevens, Roberto Meri, and then of course Fabio Lima, who made his free practice debut in Hungary.
Oh, really? Those three, they've come along quite nicely between them. The current incumbents in the race seat, Will Stevens, he's really not put a foot wrong this year. While Mary started quite slowly, he's now progressed to quite often giving the Britain a run for his money there. And with the increased prospects for next season, they're probably not going to get this new car onto the grid anytime soon. But if they can work from that, if it has potential for next season, it would be logical and just seamless again to retain those drivers, unless there is, of course, that little speculation that they could make a switch to a Honda power unit, and that could open up a potential avenue for Kevin Magnussen and Stoffel Van Dorn, but we haven't really heard much to this effect, so it's unlikely that this will be the case. We'll just see the same drivers again on the grid.
Indeed, and so Haas F1, which is the new team coming to the grid in 2016. It's such a good thing to see that there is amongst Caterham folding last year and then Marussia Mana operation having to resurrect itself, that there is a new team that's looking at getting into the sport, and considering what we've heard so far, they've got close ties with Ferrari, which will essentially mean that they're a de facto team to Ferrari, and perhaps this will allow Esteban Gutierrez, the former Sauber driver, now Ferrari test driver, to perhaps take a seat, considering his Mexican background, and obviously, with Haas wanting North American American drivers in his team, Gutierrez would be a fit.
Well, my money had been on someone like Jean-Eric Verne getting the nod, but it seems he's gone off and he's content now to commit to a full campaign in a Formula E, which is surprising considering that he had taken on that Ferrari role with a clear motive on returning to the grid within 12 months, but he's done that, and it's illogical then to see how he could base that around a Formula One berth concurrently. So it's looking very much as though Esteban Gutierrez and indeed quite logically Alexander Rossi will be the two at this stage which form the initial lineup. And again, we keep mentioning his name. Maybe Nico Hulkenberg could be his last resource to get that move up. If you can see that there's going to be a close link between Ferrari and the Haas satellite quasi-Ferrari outfit, if you like, and have that similar potential at the front. But otherwise, yeah, Gutierrez and Rossi are the men for this new team.
Would perhaps Kimi Raikkonen to stick around in F1 consider going over to Haas if he is turfed by Ferrari?
I couldn't see that happening. I think he'd want to end his career, obviously, with the team where he did indeed enjoy his solitary championship, unless there's significant income in it for him as part of some kind of third-year payout deal. But then again, they might offer some kind of pay you not to race initiative. But I'd like to think, yeah, they might as well just get two new guys, two people who clearly have got that potential to achieve, given the nod straight away. And whether that ends up being Hulkenberg too, then he's probably due that opportunity.
So Gutierrez and Rossi would be the likely duo then for the Haas team. And then finally to conclude, as we were discussing before, perhaps there is we're on the horizon of seeing another team enter Formula One, and the reason why we say this is because the FIA announced that they've opened up a tender for a new team to submit an application to enter the sport by September the 1st, and by the 30th of September a decision will be made by the FIA as to whether this team will race or not next year. But so far we haven't heard any whisperings whatsoever, but going off all the rumours and whispers and whatnot, perhaps this, as you said, could be the opportunity for a de facto McLaren Honda team to be created.
Yeah, well, under this art moniker, that if they made the step up from GP2 category there, it would really tie in with Stoffel Van Dorn's current employment. He's taken the world by storm there. We see him pretty much streaking the field even when he's in the reverse grid situation, mired down the pack. He tends to come out on top, and he really, for next year, it's looming. If they're going to be the men, if it is a conjunction with McLaren, these two, you can't see how they'd cast Magnussen aside for a second consecutive campaign, and to keep someone as a naturally talented as the Stoffel Van Dorn waiting in the wings yet again, that they're the men for the team, if it does come to fruition, that is. And it's exciting to see them there, even if it's not going to be a successful outfit immediately, just to see them mixing it with the known quantities there, with the prospect of whether it's 1 or 2 years down the track that they get that call up to a McLaren when Button and Alonso are on their way, that they've got that backing and that grounding there, rather than having to kick their heels essentially for however much longer that'll be.
Yeah, well, especially for Magnussen, who, as we said before, only got that single season in F1 last year before being cast aside essentially to the role of reserve driver, and he got to race this year at the Australian Grand Prix in place of Fernando Alonso, but didn't even make it to the grid, and all other ambition he had for this season to race in other categories such as IndyCar and even do the 24-hour Le Mans was put aside by the team, who blocked him from engaging in those in those other categories. So one would think that before Magnussen becomes more disgruntled, that they would try and get him a seat as soon as they can.
Yeah, well, the Dane would be well within his rights to look on, move on, whether it's IndyCar or sports cars, whatever it might be, or just cut his ties with McLaren and move on to another outfit. I'm sure they'd be happy to acquire his services. Who knows, a Force India or even a Lotus under the potential Renault badge once again. They would be really quite keen for someone of his caliber if he was on the market. So it's probably going to be a case for McLaren. They're going to want to appease him if they want to keep him on his books, with a Van Dorn very much lurking there as their man as well.
Indeed. So that about concludes then our silly season special. We hope that we've shed some light on to what may happen potentially in the next few months as we head into this back part of the championship. But next week, normal service will resume, where we will preview the Belgian Grand Prix and then also talk a bit about the news and whatnot that has gone on over this midterm break, and of course, Nostalgia Straight will return next week as well. So from me, Jawad and Baden, it's thank you for joining us today, and see you guys later.
Thanks.